I'm glad you're joining us today as we continue to look at promises the Lord gives us in the spiritual realm, the life of the living as a Christian. I'm looking at chapter 12 of Hebrews today, at a promise that most of us probably have not ever considered being a wonderful promise, maybe one that we've even rebelled against or rejected, or it might even be repulsive to us. And that is the promise of His discipline. And as he talks about this starting in verse 5, he knows that nobody wants to be disciplined. And he's not necessarily, I want to explain this once again, I've done this before, but in discipline, he's not necessarily talking about what we might think of as corporal punishment, although that could be involved. But he's talking about training, putting us in His gymnasium of life, and that might involve some very heavy-duty stuff and sometimes some negative stuff if we're rebelling against Him. But the overall picture is the Lord is disciplining us so that we might be what He wants us to be. So as we look at this, we see, once again, just the simple fact of what He's doing. There's some commands in here as well, but there are some wonderful promises that we want to pick up on. So look at verse 5 of Hebrews chapter 12. And you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by Him. So he starts off by saying, look, you seem to have forgotten that if you are the son of God, the child of God, then He will discipline you. Don't take that lightly. Don't look down on that. Do not faint when He reproves you for doing something wrong. Verse 6, for those whom the Lord loves, He disciplines, and He flogs every son whom He receives. For it is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom the Father does not discipline? Now that leads us into the promise. If we are His, then He loves us so much that He will not simply let us get away. He will not simply let us go down a pathway that leads us further and further away from Him. He loves us too much for that. And He says that God does this because He loves us. This is His promise. I am not going to let you veer away so far that you simply walk away from me. I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to discipline you. I'm going to train you. I'm going to do what is necessary for you to be living as I want you to live. And it says here, for what son is there whom the Father does not discipline? Well, I'm glad he said this in the first century, because I think in the 21st century, there's a lot of fathers and mothers who think it's cruel to discipline their children. That if children misbehave, then we need to simply understand them and reason with them or whatever. In the first century, people didn't think that way. I don't think we should be thinking that way today. We certainly should understand our children and reason with them and talk through that with them, various things. But discipline is part of the process of raising children. And the loving father, go back to the book of Proverbs, if you don't believe that, the loving father, the loving mother disciplines their children for their own good. Not because they don't love them, not because they want to be cruel or mean to them, but because discipline is part of the training of a child to raise them up for the Lord. And so he says, just as the Father loves His children and disciplines them, so God loves us and disciplines us. Drop down to verse 10. For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them. So I think implied here is fathers, as they raise children for 18 years or whatever, we will discipline our children during that time, a short time. Eventually they grow up and move away. And we do it as seems best to us. That implies it's not with perfection. So as I was raising our boys, there were times I disciplined them wrongly, maybe too harshly, maybe too leniently. Maybe I didn't have all the facts. I did the best I could, but there were times, probably, no doubt, that I didn't do it very well. But I did the best I could. So that's what a father does. But verse 10, for they disciplined for a short time. But in verse 11, he says, and all discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful but sorrowful, but for those who have been trained by it, Afterwards, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness. Again, part of the promise here. Right now, discipline from the hand of God may not seem very joyful. What child enjoys being disciplined by their parents? And yet those who've been trained by it, those who've had loving parents that train their children, and that include discipline, the children look back and are grateful for the efforts their parents made to train them and to go the right way. Same thing with the Lord. As the Lord trains us, sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's difficult and we're not so excited about it. But as we look back on that and see what He did in order to train us to live in holiness, we're so grateful that the Lord loved us enough to do that. And that's His promise here, folks. His promise is He loves us so much that He will do what is necessary to train us for holiness. Sometimes that can be hard. Sometimes it's more gentle. But He does what is necessary, and He does it unlike a human father or mother who may do so imperfectly. He does it perfectly, so that He is disciplining us just the right amount for just the right occasion so that we grow in holiness. Wonderful promise that God gives us who follow Him. I'm grateful for it. I trust you are as well.